Welcome to Cyber909, your source for wit and wisdom in cybersecurity and beyond. On this podcast, your host, Veteran Chief Security Officer and cyber aficionado Den Jones, taps his vast network to bring you guests, stories, opinions, predictions, and analysis you won't get anywhere else. Join us for Cyber909 Episode 11 with Tyler Farrar.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Cyber909 podcast, where we like to talk about the softer things in life. You know, there's a lot of pods that will cover breaches and they'll dissect the breaches and all that stuff. Well, we recognize there's enough of them in the world. So we want to cover some of the other stuff. And I always seem to manage and dig up some really fun, interesting guests. And now today, Tyler is returning because he was on my old podcast, the Get It Started, Get It Done, when we were at Banyan, or when I was at Banyan. And I wanted him back on, though, because Tyler, you were talking about, you had an article, 2 articles, I think now, maybe more, because you do write a lot. So we'd love to dig into that as you introduce yourself. But yeah, you had an article that really got my attention the other week, and I'm like, shit, man, I want to have you on the show, and we'll start talking about that. So, Tyler, why don't you introduce yourself and give everyone your background, and then we'll jump into the fun stuff.
Yeah, no, thanks, Den. Great to be back. Great to be chatting with you again. Hey, everybody. Tyler Farrar, CISO at Exabeam. Ran cybersecurity at a satellite company called Maxar Technologies. I've consulted for KPMG in the past, and I was in the Navy for 11 years as a cryptologic warfare officer doing cyber stuff under U.S. Cyber Command.
Awesome. Yeah, hey, maybe we need a show just for the Navy crypto stuff. It's funny, when I was doing my CISSP, cryptology, that whole piece of the puzzle in that 10 books of common knowledge or whatever it was then, I was always like, holy shit, man, this is blowing my brain. I don't know whether it was just I wasn't enthusiastic about it. It just seemed dull and boring. But then when I brought it back to like previous world wars and other like army stuff, or even just other like, I remember like Navajo Indians and how they were they weren't calling it encrypting, but how they were communicating in a way that other people could understand it during warfare and stuff. Anyhow. Hey, Tyler, great to have you back on the show. Normally we catch up at these social events, all the fancy CISOs get to all hang out with and stuff. So this time is cool because we can talk a little bit more about the business side. And let me see. So you're a bit of a writer in the background. I heard this. I was talking to one of your colleagues, Allison, earlier today. She's now at Anomaly Security. And she was just saying, like, you were the marketing person's dream because your communication style, your skills there, your written skills are just phenomenal. And I would agree, because I read an article, and first of all, the writing was brilliant, but then secondly, what the content was, I just hit me, right? You were talking about how companies buy more technology than they can deploy correctly or efficiency. This concept of technology sprawl, and you end up with more technology than you do staff. So why don't you explain a little bit about, there was a couple of articles, so why don't you explain that one and share with everybody what the premise was, and then we will include the link in the show notes, but why don't you jump in?
No, thanks. First off, thanks for the kind words, and for everybody listening and watching. I love to write, but I love to write about things that I am passionate about, or things that I have an opinion on, and usually those are my opinions and not representative of any company that I work for. But either way, I like to share those opinions, and I think it does resonate with a lot of other people, and I hope that it does, and I hope that it sparks conversations, and maybe even for some calls for change in some areas. One of the articles that I recently published was called "Doing Cybersecurity," And it's to some of the extent of what Den was just talking about. There is a major investment in tooling, and it's sometimes not really the right answer. And when we think about people, process, and technology, I think technology is heavily used over or taken advantage of over people and process. If you're a CISO out there that has been impacted or been at the helm when a breach occurred, you probably realized that the tools didn't save you after all. And the people and process, particularly process, would have been a lot more important, probably would have saved you or saved a little bit more of whatever the impact actually was. But the investment in these tools have happened. And I think what's happened from that is there's been just this tremendous focus on that. And we've missed focusing on really what matters most. And if you want to call it the basics, or if you want to call it the foundational elements of cybersecurity, the basic word is a little touchy for me, because if it was basic or if it was easy, then everybody would be doing it. But it is the stuff that is foundational to cybersecurity that I think a lot of organizations have gotten away with, because it's easier to buy a tool than to go implement that process or get the right people in place to implement that process. And with the people part, it's really important. You have to lead them. You have to guide and direct them and set that strategy. And that is difficult. The other part of this article really talks about, okay, so we have all of these tools and some of them are effective. We can't always measure that effectiveness, or are you getting the value out of the product that you've invested in? And that's really important. But the other part of it is these tools are generating a lot of data, a tremendous amount of data. And data is good if we can turn that data into some sort of actionable intelligence. And so I try to make a call of maybe we start doing cybersecurity differently. Clearly, there's some things here that aren't working. So here's a call to action. Can we find a new way to do cybersecurity?
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I was thinking we done a tools assessment in Adobe at one point when I was running enterprise security there. We had 2.5 tools per employee. Mm-hmm. And the measurement of a lot of, especially in enterprises, their goals, when the goal structure, SMART goals, right? That's cool and all. Maybe the acronym is brilliant, but the reality is a goal is not deploying the technology. All right. So, but I remember for probably 15 years in Adobe, we'd write our goals in a way that'd be like, we're going to deploy this technology like that. That is an objective, but the goal is to reduce risk, or the goal is to improve operational or reduce costs, or there's a business goal. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people miss the business goal. And in the end, they deploy the technology and the process is wrapped around the technology as opposed to being the other way around. And then at the end of it, you've got tools in place and you think your vulnerability management program is going great because you've got 5 tools deployed and 10 or 15 people or whatever you're. Now, in some cases, 5 tools usually meant you had 3 people doing it, or 2 if you were lucky, right? But like you say, then a breach occurs and you're sitting there going, wait a minute, this didn't stop it. This didn't do anything for me. The way we were attacked, these things didn't matter. And I jump in. I'm a bit of a comedian, shall we say, when it comes to jumping on a stage and saying how some strategies are failing us, because I look at it like things like DLP. Like, yeah, do we not want to lose our data? That's a true statement. But data classification, and if you've got 40,000 people in your company and you expect them to understand the difference between a restricted or internal or public, I mean, who are you kidding, right? So no amount of security training, and this is one thing as well, you do that annual security awareness training as if that's going to educate them on the data classification. It was all bullshit. Yeah. So I'm totally with you on it. So new CISO, if you were So you and I have both done this a few times now, but if you're the first time CISO and you stroll into, that fancy new job, now usually the first time CISO, you're promoted from within that company. I think a very small occasion you're going to apply for a job and become a CISO, and that's your first ever gig. So I think that doesn't happen as much. But you're in this new job. You've likely wherever you go, you've inherited something, right? So you've got this tech debt, you've got people debt, you've got a team that, maybe good, maybe not. What's your advice for those guys or gals when they stroll into those positions from a technology perspective?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand what you have in your arsenal today, and does it fit in the overall, we'll call them boxes of cybersecurity, or maybe layers of defense of cybersecurity. You have something that falls within AppSec, you have something that falls within vulnerability management and EDR, et cetera, et cetera. It's important to know that, and certainly understanding then what's the contract look like, what do your licenses look like, but okay, how does that apply to actual cybersecurity? I think the foundational elements really bubble down to two areas. One is the dreaded asset management that, again, tools can help there, tell you what you have, but it is really important. And not only what you have, but what's actually active on your network right now. The other piece is network segmentation. Segmentation, whether that be network or whether that be access control. If you can have good asset management and good segmentation, you're already well ahead of many companies. And if focus on those two items, then from there, look at what are my technologies that kind of fit into those two buckets. And then what do I have layered on top of that? And now you can start to build out a true defense in depth. But again, focusing on the foundational elements of security, those two right there, asset management, segmentation, whether it be network or access control, I think is really where someone should start.
Yeah. And then, you work at Exabeam, a company which builds a great product. At Cisco, my team were a customer of Exabeam. We were using it for our security intelligence. And you mentioned about data, right? So we have the ability to gather a whole host of information from all these environments and technologies and use it in a way that's proactive for security as opposed to reactive. So, in your experience, especially your time at Exabeam, I mean, what do you see that blend of people using data in a way that can help fight as opposed to react?
Yeah, like you said, and I mentioned earlier, all of the tooling that you do have, whether it be security tools or just the infrastructure itself, can all generate data. They can all log something, and it's what you do with that information or that data to actually reveal information, intel, and insights to make decisions. It's hard. That's the hardest part, is maybe not necessarily finding the needle in the haystack, which can happen as well, but just every day of like, what should I be focusing on? What should I be working on? And as a CISO, that's the questions I would hope that you're always asking is my team working on the right things? From the detection side and doing like threat detection, investigation, and response, that becomes very important because you're utilizing those tools and logging all of those tools and assets, et cetera, to identify behaviors that are indicative of something bad. And you want your team focusing on the most bad or the worst thing there, right? Like that's where you want them focused, but how do you dictate or show that? Where is the true threat? Now, the other side of that, which if we start to look at, there's that type of firefighting that will happen. And there's also the prevention space. So how do we apply that same concept to prevention and being able to identify what we've called in the past the threat debt, of where you have something, a vulnerability, a misconfiguration, what have you, that's going to get you in trouble. It didn't get you in trouble today. No threat actor has taken advantage of it, or nobody within your company has either with intent or not, made an inadvertent mistake, done something to cause the either operational disruption or true data loss, credential compromise, et cetera, but it's going to happen, or very well could happen. How do you detect those things? And how do you pay down that debt? So I think there's the other concept of utilizing technology to identify those areas that if you don't fix, they're going to get you in trouble, and then prioritizing, these are the things that you should fix next. And that's what I also mentioned in my article. I also advise for a company called Cybersecurity, and that's something that they're heavily focused on, as well as identifying where those risk priorities are that could really yield a threat actor or somebody internally making a mistake and taking advantage of that vulnerability or misconfiguration down the road.
Yeah, I was just about to lead into another article that you wrote, the CISO Paradox.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you share a little bit about what that's all about, and then we can dig into. I got some CISO paradoxes just myself, So why don't you share the article?
Yeah, so I wrote this one recently. It published last week, and I just I see the recurring struggle across the CISO community where CISOs are bearing the responsibility of securing their organizations, yet they often lack that authority to make key decisions. I think right now, if you go into like the CISO society, the word justify and then the sentence that comes with it of how do I justify has come up probably 24 times in the last 2 months. You look at other words of like board reporting or things like that, that comes up a lot of how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I make, how do I get people on board with what we need to do? And then the other one that stood out to me was really around, like, again, justifying their budgets and reporting. Where do they report to? Most aren't reporting to the CEO, as an example. Yeah. So that should be no surprise, especially if you're a CISO listening to this. That's no surprise of where those things are. And so I think that there's this power imbalance that doesn't just create challenges for the CISO, but it really does impact the entire organization's security posture. And it's really just a conversation that I wanted to start because it's a reality that many CISOs face. And I think some may not feel as comfortable sharing that publicly. But I've had, several CISOs reach out directly to me after the article went live, just saying that, it definitely resonated strongly with the points that I discussed.
Yeah. And I thought that, and one of the things, there's a couple of things for me, right? First of all, I love the title, just, the word paradox for me, always I'm like, that's a cool word, just in itself. The paradox for me, I think we are, as CISOs, legally held more accountable personally. Depending on the company you're in, you're more personally liable now than we've ever been before. I think our budgets are getting cut more than they've ever been before. I look at it like the way we justify or try to justify to the board or to the CEO our existence, I think is you think it would get easier because the number of breaches, but it's not. And then I talk to more and more CISOs that are between jobs right now. Mm-hmm. And quite literally, half of them that I spoke to are between jobs through their own choice. Mm. The company they were working at and the conversations they were having, and I'll share my own experience. My conversations with a CEO, a previous company, was along the lines of, I'd love to be the CISO or the CSO, but under these constraints, under these requirements that I have, because if you want to give me the title, but you're not giving me the full accountability and autonomy that goes with it, that doesn't work for me. And a lot of companies, especially vendors, they want you to be the mouthpiece. It's almost like you're part of the go-to-market strategy. They want to tap into your network.
Right.
And I'm like, no, I'm not your sales whipping boy, right?
Mhm.
That's not what I'm going to do. Now, when I was at Banyan, I absolutely loved traveling the country, jumping on the stage and talking about cybersecurity strategy.
Mhm.
There was little sprinkles of shit the product does,
Mhm.
or like what we would do, but I'm not hard selling the product.
Mhm.
And as you know, right, these companies, they sponsor to be at some of these conferences. It's pay to play. So being the practitioner at that event, I was the rare one that said, I'm not selling your shit. You want to, we make great shit. You want to see it? Go to the booth and go talk to the people. They'll happily sell you some stuff. Um, I want to talk about strategies that I think are failing the industry. And you guys are all practitioners. That's why you're here.
Right.
You came here to learn some stuff. I'm going to share some stuff. And you don't need to buy our stuff to achieve the things that I'm suggesting.
Mhm.
And actually, and I was honest, I'm like, we don't even make all this stuff that I'm telling you here. Like, we don't make half of the shit. Some of it you can use our tech, and I'll tell you can use Duo as well. I told them I was at Cisco. We deployed Duo for Zero Trust in that example. So Paradox for me is it's getting more challenging to do your job effectively. And even you said like reporting, it's like, yeah, if the reporting structure is not right, then how do you have the influence across the organization? So I'd love to hear, give me a horror story. Maybe it does not necessarily, it doesn't have to be your personal horror story, but give me a horror story from a CISO. And then advice you would have to overcome overcome that situation.
Yeah. Let me start with, for me, the paradox really is where CISOs are held responsible for, and you said this word earlier, the outcomes, but they lack the control. And there are the breaches that happen, again, because of potentially lack of control, lack of command. CISOs are asked to leave, they're being held accountable. But when you look at like why is it that whole 18 to 24 month life cycle of a CISO? I don't have the data to support my opinion on it, but I'll tell you what my opinion is that I don't think the primary reason is because of a data breach, security breach. I think it's more because of, we'll call it the word burnout, but the burnout is really caused by the paradox that I write about in this article. I think for the most part, a CISO, in this case, really what any of us want is to have a seat at the table. I would love to take a poll and find out, of all the CISOs that may be watching or listening to this, how many actually carry a VP title? Or do you have a senior director or director level in your organization? Are you truly an executive? And then out of those folks that are executives, how many of you are actually part of the executive leadership team and you sit in all of the meetings that talk about business strategy, where are we going next? And then with regards to planning, how do we actually plan? We're pushing out this new product or this new capability in the second quarter, and so these are the key features of that from a let's say customer usability perspective and all. But what are the security features that need to be planned as well right from the get-go with all of the senior leaders? And so I'm very curious I hope people are listening to this right now and thinking, oh yeah, that's me. Like I am a VP, but I'm not part of the ELT. I'm not in those meetings. Those decisions and those conversations happen in the closed room. And then I have to find out about it later and then adjust my entire program and then beg for results afterwards.
Yeah.
I'll speak generally with like horror stories because I think generally that's the situation that happens. And so from there, you might either be chasing security and never get in, particularly engineering, and you're never getting those things in place that you like to, or B, it's not just a security conversation anymore, it's a resiliency conversation, And I bet you've had some sort of outage because of poor business continuity planning, change management, et cetera, because you never were there to talk about how these things were going to be built in a secure and resilient fashion.
Yeah. So why do you think, I mean, I got a couple of ideas, but why do you think CISOs aren't at the table as often as they should be?
I think some of it is just security, or cybersecurity being still foreign to many C-level executives, to business executives, the board, and the executive leadership team. I think that's part of it. I think there's probably another aspect of that. I don't know if it's an uncomfortability with saying, oh, here's another C-level that we need to now bring in as part of the overall leadership team. And it's almost like a power struggle, maybe. I think there's something more psychologically there. I can't figure out what that is yet, but there's something else there that is almost preventing a lot of, whether it's CFO, COO, CHRO, et cetera, of saying, yes, come on, you are one of us now, and you're part of that, larger executive leadership team. So something's preventing that from happening, and I think most companies still.
Yeah, I mean, I would question whether a lot of it is they don't understand our role. I think a lot of CISOs are technologists, so their communication skills maybe aren't as eloquent as yours, right? They're techie geeks, but their communication sucks. And I think that means that a lot of CEOs and their ELT regard the CISO person as just a technology player. And they're going to take the marching orders and go do some technology stuff.
Right.
And I just think I think our ability, and then, by the way, this is why I wanted to start this pod, because focusing more on this side of it, the softer skills, like how do you market yourself within your company, yourself or your team? So one of the things that we threw together was a package around internal marketing. So if you're a security organization and you need help to promote who you are, what your value proposition is, how can you affect change in a business that can drive revenue in a positive way? All of these things, I think they're missing, and that result for me makes it more akin to the CISO not being regarded as a player in the business level strategy. And I kind of quite, I mean, I like you, I don't have any data, but you and I have been around the bloody block enough that we speak to people, and at the end of it, I walk away thinking, like, most of the CEOs I talk to, they don't think of their CISOs like that. They don't think of them as a business level executive that they want to have as a trusted partner in those strategy conversation. I was lucky at Banyan because I was part of the ELT. I was in the weekly staff meeting with the CEO and participating in conversations about go-to-market, about sales. What are we sharing to the board? Like all of that. But that was a really small company. Bigger companies, probably not so much, So I think the title for me, I kind of scratched the title, whether you're a VP or director. I think the most important thing you hit on is, are you part of the CEO's circle of trust and participating in the strategic business conversation?
Right.
If you're not, then your role is severely hampered.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And some companies just choose to say we need a CISO because we're supposed to have a CISO. So we'll name the most technical person here that can do that. But to your point, it's cyber's over here to the side. It is this technical problem to solve. We'll put more of a technical person there, and it'll find a sweet spot of somebody that can still speak to us, and we can at least get a briefing more usually because we have to versus because we want to. But it's still completely separate from, let's just talk about, business. So there's still this, hey, here's the cyber readout. Why wouldn't the cyber readout be just a subcomponent of the overall, this is our product or, our business readout for the quarter?
Yeah. And I think it really depends on the business itself and the kind of industry you're in and what you're doing. You and I have been fortunate or unfortunate enough that at least one of our jobs was with a security vendor or a vendor that sells into that space. And I think that is a uniquely different experience than, my experience at Cisco. I ran enterprise security, so I didn't have the CISO title. I reported to the CIO, but there was a CISO who's Brad, and he had somebody in his team who had the title of CISO. So being a bigger company, these titles and shit changes a lot. The most important thing for me was I participating with the CIO and her staff? And then was I participating with Brad, who is the CSO, the CIO's peer, and his staff? And if the answer is yes, then I think I'm in a good space to really have an impact.
Right.
If the answer is no, the minute you're not reporting directly to one of them, then your impact and your authority just gets diminished, and it becomes incredibly hard to be as effective. So for me, that was a big thing. We're close on time, so I'm always conscious of our time, because we're both busy people. So what do you think the future for CISOs hold? I mean, if we roll forward a year or two from now, what do you think is going to happen with this role in the industry?
I mean, these breaches are going to obviously continue to happen. And unfortunately for many companies, I don't want to be too pessimistic. I'll try to be realistic here, but the breach will happen. They'll get the wake-up call. Whether or not that sticks, the lesson sticks or not, is, remains to be seen. And there's always been talks about the combination of CISO and CIO. And okay, that's fine. Like, put that to the side. You don't even have many CIOs reporting to CEOs either. Sometimes COO, sometimes CFO, et cetera. So I'm not sure in the short term that CISOs or CIOs or this hybrid mix will be still reporting to the CEO. And Grant, I don't want to just talk about reporting structure. Like, I think that's a major component of it, but the bigger component is, are you part of the executive leadership team? Are you in the room? Are you having those conversations? That's number one most important thing. So, yeah, Dan, I don't know. I don't think that that's going to be a short-term gain. I think we're going to have some hard lessons learned before things really start to change. And what we can do now about it, one is please, read the article, share it, talk about it. Initially I want CISOs to read it and hopefully resonate with that, but it can't stop there. Like the point of the article was to initially raise awareness, but again, we talk about outcomes. The outcome here is, how do we change that awareness from the CISO reading the article to the CEO reading the article or having that conversation? Like, how do we broaden this topic outside of the security community to those other ELT C-level roles, where they can start to become aware of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, no, that's great. I was as you're saying, it's, one of my challenges in life is, as you're saying stuff, I'm listening to what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm already thinking about, oh my God, here's an opportunity. Here's something we could do to move the needle of what you were thinking. So I was thinking maybe you could do a guest blog post for us where you talk about the CEO, because I would love to actually just do an article that says, how does a CEO capitalize and leverage a CISO effectively? So we're looking at it from our lens out, but if we can twist the role around and say, okay, well, how should a CEO or an executive think about leveraging CISOs and our people in our industry, effectively? Because I think that's part of the challenge. Part of the challenge is they just don't know how to get the most out of their CISO staff.
Right.
I think you're trying not to be too bleak about it. One of the reasons I started 909 was I think over the next 5 years, more CISOs are going to be disengaged because A, burnout, as you mentioned earlier, but B, that risk reward thing doesn't sit in our favor any longer. Yeah. So why? I've had a lot of CISOs saying, I don't want to be a CISO now. I'm happy to be the director of who gives a shit.
Yeah.
And do a lower level position just because they don't think the legal side of it is going to be in their favor in the future. So I see one of two things happening. I see there's the virtual CISO stuff. I think more and more people are going to join that market in that capacity, especially the ones who are towards the end of their career. They might jump into there. I think more legal responsibility, especially in enterprises, is going to fall on the CISO even harder. So I think their personal liability might get worse, which will drive the virtual CISO community to grow. And then I think the other thing is that's going to result in companies struggling to find good quality CISOs.
Yeah. And that's the number one, like what you just said at the end there, that good quality CISOs is like the most important piece, because the CISO job is not going away. I see it all over the job boards today. What sometimes surprises me, or maybe initially surprised me, is the salaries that are associated with that. They do seem quite low compared to market rates. And so then I ask myself, why is such a low? Well, you're going to get what you pay for, and you're going to attract talent. And I think the problem, we could go on this topic. This is a different topic completely, but I'll try to summarize it. Is like, we haven't, the cybersecurity community, we've moved so fast, and we haven't really set up like, what is the path to CISO? Everybody wants, that's like major topics in blogs and podcasts, whatever. People that join security, they go to college for cybersecurity, and they're like, okay, what's my path to CISO? It's not the only path that they desire, but that's certainly a big one. And so there's this aggressive pursuit over becoming CISO and putting that there. And the problem is today, that's pretty easy to get. You could go find a smaller company, make 120 grand a year, and have a CISO title. And so because companies are hiring like that, and because our industry hasn't really said, this is what like finance or whatever, this is what a CFO actually looks like, or this is what a CTO actually looks like. We've kind of opened and done this to ourselves to some degree, that, almost anybody could be a CISO. Like that job's probably available to them nowadays. So you bring in CISOs that may not have that quality that you talked about, and you're going to lose the quality CISOs because they are tired. They can't do this anymore. They're not in the room. They're not having those conversations and at the table. And so, they either settle for something less, pivot completely into another industry or role, or they do more of the consulting and virtual fractional stuff because they don't want to do it full time.
Yeah. And I was chatting with one of our CISO Society colleagues the other week, or probably a couple of months ago now, and we were just having that conversation about the virtual CISO space. But this applies to the regular CISO space as well, which is, you've got 2 or 3 people, you've got he and I that have got like 20, 30 years experience, multi-CISO positions, range or depth of experience, global teams or size of teams or budgets or all of that. And then you got some little young kid whose resume looks good, but they don't have any of that. They don't have half of that, or they have a couple of years. And then the price point is half of ours. So when a CEO is looking at, like, I need a virtual CISO or a full-time CISO, they're like, I'm going to spend less money. But what they're going to get, though, is not someone like you or I that can sit there and look at a landscape and within a few days be like, I already know what needs done here.
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge difference between that. Like the man, it's funny. I've seen this meme everywhere right now, which is, the guy's got a cooker that's broken, and he calls in the repair guy, and the repair guy just comes in and he just whacks it on the side with a hammer. And he's like, that'll be $100, please. And the guy's like, what do you mean $100? You've been here a minute and you hit it with a hammer. He's like, I want that itemized. And he's like, okay. Hit an appliance with hammer, $1. Knowing where to hit with a hammer, $99. And I think that's the thing for you and I and others is the experience is something we've gathered over decades. And the experiences we've had. So time is not the thing. It's the quantity and quality of diverse experiences that we've had. And I'd sit there and say, people was like, yeah, like the strategy in high risk countries, strategy and security for M&As, strategy or the execution of the CEO's airplane. There's 19 applications, or there was then, to run an airplane, and some of them hold PII. How are they protected? So the whole thing about experience is like, that's the value proposition here. Is it a good CISO? They may have qualifications, but they may also have some great experiences, so that when they get to your company and your business, they understand you're running a business and they understand how to overlay and protect that business. So that's it's only a Tuesday we're recording this. So as a Tuesday, that's the best thought you get from me, Tyler, after 2 days of a working week,
Drop the mic.
Well, I would, but it's on a stand, so I could drop it later. So hey, look, I appreciate your time. I'd love to have you back on the show because you're an influential character in the scene. You know your shit. And you are pushing out some really thought-provoking articles. So we'll include those in the show notes. I do encourage people to read them and, like you say, share them. And ideally, maybe send them to a few of your CEO buddies, or maybe the CEOs and VCs and founders that are following the show. Maybe they can spend a few minutes on that stuff, because even though they're not a CISO, I think getting to learn more about the role and how to work with a CISO effectively would be highly beneficial. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time. And folks, please, we'll need to do fancy like and subscribe and push the button here and do this, but we don't do those overlays because just you all know what to do by now. You don't need fancy shiny buttons for that nonsense. Tyler, thank you, sir. As always, I appreciate your time. Hopefully we'll catch up in person really soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Take it easy.
Thanks for listening to Cyber909. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and don't miss an episode of your source for wit and wisdom in cybersecurity.